Texas. Well, Jim, thank you and agreeing to with me. Again, viewers test.
Basically, I worked as a kid. What I did at first was factory work. I worked on punch presses, drill presses. In turn, I graduated up to a radial arm drill. And just before I went into service, I was welding on launching craft for the Navy. So that was quite an interesting period there.
Definitely. And now, were you drafted or did you enlist in the Army?
No, I enlisted, and when I did enlist, my dad wasn't around, okay? So my mother was very much against my going in. And I went downtown in Chicago and I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And when I got home, because of my age, I believe, I had to get her signature. And she refused to sign it, and she wanted no part of that Marine Corps. So in turn, I went along with my mother's wishes, and I went downtown again. And not being sworn in as a Marine, I went to the Army. And she accepted that. But one of her requests was I also go in an uncombatant outfit like ordnance. So after I was sworn in, there was a captain that swore a bunch of us in. He called us aside and told us there was a directive that had just come down from Washington, and there could be no non-combatants in our age group. So in turn, they interviewed each and every one of us separately, and when it came to me, the fellow said, because of my experience, he thought I should go in the Armored Corps because they had a lot of ordnance there. And I never actually went to any school for maintenance of any kind. But I was in the Tank Corps.
Now, as for boot camp, where did you attend?
Well, camp-wise, after being sworn in by in Chicago, they sent us out to Camp Grant, Illinois. And I don't know what you'd call that kind of a camp at that time, but that camp no longer exists. And the city of Rockford, Illinois has an airport there right now. But they shipped us down to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I went through 13 weeks of basic training. So.
Now, after basic, were you assigned directly to the 12th Armored?
Yeah, after basic, we went down to Camp Campbell, Kentucky, and I was with the 12th from that point on. When they went through Campbell, and when they went down to Barclay, and through the end of the war.
Good. Any particular experiences or things that stand out in your mind from your time at Campbell or Barclay?
Well, there's a lot of experiences, but none that were that really stick out in my mind. Not really.
Okay. Now, Camp Shanks, New York, and the trip across the Atlantic.
Camp Shanks, New York. Well, we had a man that was killed in Camp Shanks, and I think he had gone to town with a few others, and he returned walking to Camp Shanks, he walked down the railroad tracks and get hit by a train. And that was a shocker to begin with. Actually, the time in Shanks was pretty brief, and it wasn't long before we were on Liberty ships and went over to England.
How did you find the crossing, the actual trip across the Atlantic?
Oh, that wasn't bad. The first time, I think everybody got seasick. Not myself, but everybody else did. And one thing about that trip, it was the ship's cook's birthday. So we had sauerkraut and wieners for his birthday. I always thought that was great. Yeah. I don't like sauerkrauts and wieners.
Now, getting across the Atlantic and into England, any interactions with the English people, or how did you find the countryside? And
Well, we went into Tidworth Barracks, all right, and during the time at Tidworth, we received new equipment. And this is an odd thing. I believe it was Patton who had stolen our equipment for our division. I think it went to the 14th. And so we drew all new equipment. And in turn, we were kept busy just cleaning up and getting ready and making sure they were well stocked and one thing and another. And during this time, I also had the duty of company painter. So I had to put the symbols and the numbers on each and every tank. And it was a real busy period. About the only thing that we did for relaxation at that time, we found out the British had a drink they call stout, and stout will really let you know it is stout. So.
Any trouble as a result of that?
Any trouble? Oh no, I didn't have any trouble as far as the stout was concerned. And actually, I enjoyed doing a few things, and I wasn't what you would call a strict GI. I went out and acquired 16 pounds of coffee, and I think we got it from the British.
So from the British it was acquired and not quite liberated. Yeah. Liberated happened once you got on the continent.
Liberated's a good term. I like that. But acquired, that covers a lot of sin.
True.
So anyway, it was just before we shipped out of Tidworth. And I took and I did hide the coffee. We had a few other items that were hidden on our tank. So, in turn, they held a shakedown inspection just before we left Tidworth. And each tank had their gear laid on the ground. And when they laid the gear on the ground, ours was the only tank they didn't find any contraband or whatever you want to call it. And they took a great deal of time trying to find it. And the tank crew members were kind of cussing me out and told me later that I should let them find something. Right? But what I had done is when you receive ammunition, the bigger shells, they come in canisters, and there'll be 3 in a banded together. So I had taken the ammunition out of some of them and put them in our rack, ammunition rack. And I put all the coffee and other good things in the casings, and then I resealed them with wax. So they never did find them. And I hope that they're still not worried about that.
It's been a few years, so I bet you all's forgiven. Now, one story you told yesterday about putting someone's bed on the roof.
What's this now?
Putting the sergeant's bed up on the roof.
Oh, yes.
We've got to get that one again.
All right. Well, we had a sergeant, and Sergeant Pucci, and Pucci would often go into town, and he'd come in at any time of the day or night, and I don't know how he got away with it all. But anyway, one of the nights he was gone, I took his bed and I put it up on top of the barracks roof. And I remade the bed, and I was in my own cot, and in the early morning hours, Pucci's standing over me, and he's giving me what for on. I told him didn't know a thing about it, of course, you know. So in the morning, when we were all out in the street in ranks, one by one, the guys saw this bed sitting up on top of the roof, you know, and they all started to laugh. They all found out if I did really work to get that thing up there. But that brings to mind a few other things, and I worked out in Mock Village for a while. And when I do work in Mock Village, that's where you would set up charges, and also you'd pull targets up, and they'd run the different companies through to teach attacking a village and stuff like that. And when our company went through, the first sergeant took me in his squad, and I'm sure he did it to get a good score. And I led him all through the wrong direction. And everywhere he went, something went wrong. He was a very good friend of mine, too. But one thing also, I only worked out in that Mock Village for a short period of time. But surprisingly, after I was no longer out at Mock Village, people would open their locker and it would kind of puff up in front of them. I'd set a little charge inside. It woke more than one up. Never enough to hurt anybody.
One more story from yesterday I need you to repeat. Something about a colonel's Jeep.
Oh, no. The Jeep. Well, this is a period where we were painting numbers back on the tank. Because we would go through periods where we painted them on and painted them off. And we were stopped, and this is in France, in this little village, and there was a Jeep. I was assigned that day to paint numbers on. And I asked for help, and I got Sergeant Abalowski. And we had a few drinks. And the longer the street got, I think the more drinks we had. But anyway, there was a general that parked a Jeep in front of the command post. And when we got to the Jeep, we painted everything. We painted his windshield, his steering wheel, the floorboard, the brakes. And anything that needed paint, we painted. He was pretty mad when he came out of there. Sergeant Abalowski was no longer a sergeant. And at that time, they couldn't do anything to me.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But that was very interesting.
Okay. Now, as far as your position in the tank, what was your combat duty on board the tank?
I was a gunner. Yeah.
And can you talk about your first combat experience?
Well, I really don't know for sure. That kind of snuck up on us. But I believe our first combat experience was up around the Maginot Line. And there's a town of Bitchy that sticks out in my mind pretty much. But basically, I believe that was our first combat in the war. I'm not certain on that. I think one of the things that happened is that we drew fire from a church steeple, and that had to be a German sniper. And we knocked that steeple down, but it became standard when you went into town. You took all the steeples out. It was the first thing you did. So, after Maginot Line, well, I'm not good on names because normally the average soldier didn't know what was over the next hill. And they didn't bother to tell us too much either.
Herlisheim.
Herlisheim. Well, Herlisheim was a bad town, a bad area. And one of the things that they were using our company for was picking up wounded and bringing them back. And getting to aid stations real quick. And this, I think, was very important. But we also were used, well, like my platoon got called out to repulse an attack the Germans were throwing at the Rainbow Division. And when we got called out there, it's very heavy, and they just kept coming. I don't know how many were involved or anything, but we did manage to stop the attack, and we got pulled out of there. But it was very close fighting. But when we did pull out, things were under control anyway. Now, one of the tanks that was there in that action, the tank commander had been dusted with mortar fire, and they decided he needed a little break. And that again was Sergeant Abalowski. So Sergeant Abalowski was given a little rest and relaxation. I don't know where they let him go or anything, but he's only gone for the day. And they called me into the CP, and a lieutenant told me he was giving me a big break and this was my big chance. And I took that tank up into Herlisheim proper. And when I took it into Herlisheim proper, all we were supposed to do is relay radio messages. So,
Resuming?
yeah. Anyway, I positioned the tank in a place I thought it was under good cover. And we were relaying radio messages, and we were in there all day. The main action, I think, was about 500 yards away from us. But anyway, we were in there all day, and in the middle of the night, we had a Sergeant Moreau, and he called us and ordered us out of town. And one of the things I did then was I went and I talked to the officer of the infantry, and I'm not certain who he was, but I could hazard a guess, but I don't want to do that. But he asked us to say a little bit, and he, I believe, wrote messages and sent them back with us. And we had not left in a short period of time, and this Moreau was back on the radio demanding and telling us we had a direct order to get out of town. So I told him not to get excited. We were going. And I didn't really think we'd ever make it out of town. But anyway, we came out of town, and I found out later that one of the ways that we got out of town is a guy from one of the other companies had grabbed a 50 caliber machine gun, and he fired down one side of the road and laid down cover for us. And we managed to return to our company and get out of there. But I told my wife that story time after time, and I told her also I didn't know how we ever got out of there. And one day at one of the reunions, the guy started to talk, and he told the same story. And when he told the same story, my wife turned to me and says, "Now you know how you got out." And here it was, a guy by the name of L. Lang, and in the action in Herlesheim, he was awarded the Silver Star. And I don't know that what he did for us is in there at all, you know, but he was an outstanding soldier through that period. Well, we did get out of there, and that tank I took up there, I gave, when we came back, Sergeant Abalowski returned, and he took command of his tank again. I went back to my own tank and was in as a gunner again. So we were called out once more, and the Rainbow Division was again under a heavy attack, and the same location. So we went out there again, and once again they just kept coming. And when they did keep coming, they got very close, and they got close enough where they did get in underneath the gun, and you can only depress that gun so far. So when this happened, I jumped out of the tank and I opened with the grease gun. And one kid, he was about 9-10 feet away, and he had a bazooka. Not a bazooka, it's a Panzerfaust. And I hit him in the foot when he dove for cover, but at least I stopped him, and then we took him prisoner. But we were there too long, and the Germans brought in big gun of some sort, and we just had moved back just a little bit. We were going to pull out of there, and as we pulled back a little bit, the tank that I had up in Herlesheim the night before took a direct shot. And the crewmen were all blown out of the tank, and when the concussion passed, they fell back into the tank, but I didn't see them go back in. I saw them come out, and I thought they were all right. But the one guy, he was from Chicago. He sat in that tank all night, and tank burned all night the next day. It's one of the bad features of a tank. When they get hit, they burn. There was a lot of action around Earlsheim, but those are the ones that are really in my mind, you know.
Yeah. As for other actions, the race to the Rhine, the Colmar Pocket, anything there that grabs you?
Well, the race to the Rhine. We were in one of the task force that actually did go. Well, I'm getting a little different here, but that was put in. I understand there were 4 divisions, armored divisions, that were put side by side to race to the Rhine. We had a fellow by the name of Leegard, and this was not my platoon, but Leegard was one of the most timid men that I ever could recall in the service, and he was put in as the point tank, and he basically led our company, at least, over about 50 miles as a point, and that's a bad position. But he did it, and he to me, the most timid man in the country, I mean in the company, and out on point like that, it's amazing. But when we got to the Rhine, there was nothing too outstanding about it. We didn't hit any solid action. We'd hit a gun now and then, a roadblock, a little skirmish here and there, but basically it was, we were behind them, go, you know, and we did.
Now, the wars, well, a couple of other things. Were you involved in the liberation of any of the POW or concentration camps?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that we were, I think the point, well, not the point, but in the task force that went up to Landsberg, and first thing about that, I believe, was the crossing of the Rhine. Not the crossing of the Rhine, the Danube. All right. And when we crossed the Danube, that was very, very fast action. And the Germans had wired that bridge. They had 500-pound bombs on it, I understand. But we were not the first there. We followed, okay? And we were pushed across to establish a foothold on the other side. And while we were over the other side, the Germans threw a couple planes in there, and they were jets, and they were trying to bomb that bridge out. Now, when they tried to bomb that bridge out, it seemed like everybody on the ground was shooting at them, and they yelled that they hit one. And when they yelled they hit one, I never saw it go down, but I'm sure they hit it, you know. And we went ahead then, and I'm not certain the amount of villages or miles we went, but we went to where we didn't have any more radio communication, and we pulled in for the night. and they established what they call a dead zone there, where if anything moves at night, you just shoot it at whatever, they're not supposed to be out there. So what they did was, again, they sent our tank back for radio communication, and they gave us a position to go to, and we went back into this town, and the position they gave us to go to, I might have been wrong, but I went to another position, all right. And we only had 3 men on that tank. So when we went to this other position, we backed it in as the tank as far as we could, and give it as much cover as possible. And we used the radio inside a farmhouse. Now, we had what we called an auxiliary engine there, and that's, we call it Little Joe, so you could use the radio at a distance from the tank. So the other 2 guys were in the farmhouse, and I was out in front, away from the tank, but I was on guard out there. And the first thing that happened was a farmer came down the street, and he got it through that there was an SS trooper in his house that was changing from uniform to civilian clothes. And I went and I got Kinnear, and we went and searched through the farm buildings and every room, every nook, every cranny. And that to me was harrowing, if you want to call it that, because I figured any time we turned a doorknob, we'd get just full of lead. But we searched the whole place and we found no trace of them. So after that, I was back on the guard position again, and it had turned night, and it was pitch black, and I heard footsteps across the street, and I waited, and I did not challenge at all. I waited, and they finally got about directly across from where I was, and I hollered halt, and they didn't halt. They just came right at me then. So I had my gun down on them, and when I had tried to halt them and they wouldn't halt, I again called out, and the footsteps just kept coming, and it was a young pregnant woman and a guy that looked like her grandfather. And it turned, it's just by the grace of God I didn't cut him down. But we got on the radio and we got a Jeep over there, and they took the pregnant woman and her grandfather away. And then in turn, let's see, that was farmer, the pregnant woman. There's also a German officer that came down the road, and this German officer had bandages all over the top of his head. And there was a soldier, a German soldier, walking with him like an orderly, and carrying a white flag. And they they wanted to have the officer cared for, so they just turned themselves in. Well, after all this little action there. I went in the house and I was sleeping. Kinnear went out and took up the same position I had outside. And while he was there, he watched 7 German soldiers come and discover our tank. And they took their rifles, they had a little talk, they stacked their rifles by the tank, and they came and they knocked on the door. And Kinnear came busting into the room, and he was yelling, "The Germans are coming!" Yeah, and that is not a good way to get woken up. But they were very happy to be taken prisoners, and we were happy that they hadn't come in shooting. That we really had a friendly hour or two before they went to them. But I think that's pretty good. I think we took 9 prisoners that night altogether. I'm not certain how many. Yeah, that would be 9. And then we rejoined the company. I think we were going for Landsberg, weren't we?
Yes.
Okay, well...
But take your time. Everything you're telling me is amazing, so keep going.
Okay. Well, anyway, we did go, and of course went up to Landsberg, and our particular tank we took and we parked it near the railroad station in town. And I saw one of the inmates from the camp there, and he was nothing but skin and bone, all right? He was a pathetic wreck. And the colonel, his name is Scott Hall, and he took command of our battalion after Herlesheim. Our first colonel was wounded and captured there. And anyway, Scott Hall he was curious and he wanted to see what was up ahead. So he came and he took Kinnear and myself, and we went with him down the railroad tracks towards the camp. And when we were going down the railroad tracks, there was other tanks along the side of the railroad, and there were infantry boys along the side of the railroad. And the infantry guys had a couple prisoners there, and they were arguing back and forth with the tankers to take them off their hands. And the tankers just asked, what are we supposed to do with them, you know? And one of the things I know is that the German that were there never made it into a PW cage. That was pretty much the end of it for them. But the colonel, he was very mad at us. As he had gone ahead, he didn't stop. But Kinnear and I had stayed there and watched what was going on. So the colonel went ahead, and we caught up with him, and he's mad at us. But we walked into this camp, and they had boxcars there, and also these boxcars had many dead people in them, just one on top of the other. And they were on the ground, and they were nothing but skeletons. But they had housed these people in huts or sheds, whatever you want to call it, where half of the building is in the ground and the other half above the ground. So one thing they had done before we got there, they had herded inmates into the one place there, and they set it on fire. And then after they set it on fire, and the inmates tried to break out the machine gun or fire it at them anyway, as they tried to exit that burning fire. It's hard to believe, unless you've seen people, there's nothing left of them. And after I got back, this is a number of years after that, I got in contact with a Jewish religious leader in Sioux City, Iowa. His name is Jim Sherman, and he has since retired. But Jim Sherman, he taught classes up at Morningside College in Sioux City, Iowa. And he had a group of people like myself who had witnessed the camps, who had survived the camps. And he would ask one of them to work in with his program as it progressed, you know. And I never turned him down. I went every time he asked. And we would give our stories to his class. And then, of course, we were out of there for a while. I did that until Jim retired. And I don't say I enjoyed giving that description of things, but at the same time I think it's a story that should be continued to be told, you know. But
and that's why I thank you so much for agreeing to sit with us and tell us. Anything else you care to add? Any other stories that come to mind, or things that you're wanting to pass on?
One story leads to another, and I could probably keep you occupied for a few hours, but I think I've pretty well covered the highlights. I'm very glad that I survived and got a home. Yep.
Sir, I thank you. I know this is not always easy to talk about. Thank you so much, sir.